I love me Lucky Charms, they're magically delicious.
Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and welcome back to another episode of Blues Brews. This week, we're following the rainbow to find the pot of gold, because we're playing Lucky Charms. As has been the theme as of late, we're chugging along with playing each legal companion in Historic Brawl, and this week we're moving on to Jegantha. We played Jegantha in the 99 of the Kenrith and Zerda deck we played a few weeks ago, and while I was building that deck, I considered also making it follow Jegantha's restrictions so I could claim it for both companions and call it a day. But then I thought better of it, realizing that that's just a lazy way out, so I focused on Zerda and told myself I'd build Jegantha later correctly. It took me a week or two to commit to it, but when I finally sat down for it, I was lost on what to do. I needed to play 5 colors because of his color identity, but I wanted to play something cool and fun that wasn't just a pile of good, overpowered cards. As I was parsing through my collection, I realized that there are a bunch of charms and commands on Arena right now. There's half of the Ravnica Guild charms, all of the Tarkir charms, all of the New Capenna charms, the Strixhaven commands, and the Tarkir commands. So many choices, so many colors, and all of them only using 1 pip of colored mana. After a little more digging, I realized there's also a bunch of 3-color cards that aren't really charms, but do serve a purpose in some form or fashion, like Crackling Doom, Trap Essence, Villainous Wealth, and Dune Blast. I threw all of these cards in a deck, replaced the Ravnica charms not on the client with things like Rip Apart, Angrass Rampage, and Drown in the Loch, and added some support pieces like Riku of Many Paths, Lila Undefeated Slickshot, and Whirlwind of Thought. Now, at this point, all that was needed was a commander. I tried both Ramos and Golos at the helm, but neither felt good. Golos felt like what I was trying to avoid by making the deck feel like just another pile of good cards, and Ramos disappointed with how little impact he had on any game that I played him. Both of these did make it into the 99, but I didn't feel like they were worthy of leading the charge. It wasn't until I was looking through cards not in my collection that I remembered that Omnath, Locust of All exists. I remember it being spoiled, but I don't think I've ever played against it, so I just kind of forgot about it. But it's perfect. So much of the deck is 3 or more colors that it's not uncommon to get mana out of it, and even when you don't, it still draws you an extra card every turn. I had such a fun time recording through this video, and I can't wait to show it to you, so I'm going to shut up, and we're just going to move into the games. Game 1, we're on the play against Niv Mizzet, and we mulligan once, keeping it 7. Opponent starts with a tap land, and passes. On our turn, we play a Sparus Headquarter and pass it back. Opponent untaps and just plays a Swiftwater Cliffs to gain a life and passes it back to us. We untap and play an Arid Mesa before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp followed by a Harbin Vanguard Aviator before passing. At the end step, we crack our Mesa to go grab a Zia Torres Proving Grounds. We untap and play a Forest before passing. Opponent untaps and plays an Ellis Core and moves to combat. They attack for 3 and pass the turn. At the end step, we cast Abzan Charm to draw 2 cards. We untap and start with a Flooded Strand for our land. Then we cast Incandescent Aria to clear away the board. We take 1 damage from Ellis Core, and we crack our fetch now because there's nothing for us to do, so this way we can F6. We grab a Rafine's Tower and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and drops a Blossoming Sands to gain a life. They don't seem to have anything else though, so they just go ahead and pass. We untap and drop an untapped Overgrown Tomb and play the Gilded Lotus, then use the Lotus mana to put Jegantha in our hand before passing the turn. Opponent untaps and immediately fires off a Bushwhack to go grab a basic. They play the forest they grab and use it to cast an Evidence Examiner. They move to combat and they collect their evidence so they can make a clue token before passing the turn. We untap and run out Whirlwind of Thought to start drawing cards. Next, we cast Silver Quill Command to draw a card and make them sacrifice a creature. Opponent sacrifices their clue in response. One of the cards we draw is a Bloodstained Mire, so we play and crack it to go grab a Ketria Triumph before passing it back to the opponent. They untap and play a Forest, followed by casting a Tribute to the World Tree. Next, they cast a Marshal of Zalfir, which gets some counters, and they pass the turn. We untap and finally get down this Timeless Lotus I meant to play turns ago. We take the opportunity to get Omnath down here and play a tapped Temple Garden before sending it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Plains, followed by a battle that makes us sacrifice our Omnath. Boo, I wanted that. They move to combat and attack the battle, killing it and allowing them to cast it from exile. After combat, they just pass the turn. We untap and realize we need to start clearing the board. We start off with the Kami War to exile their battle creature. We play an Jegantha Triumph for our land, and next we cast Jegantha so we can have a creature for this Locust command. We cast it, choosing for them to sacrifice an enchantment and have our creatures fight. We cleared their entire board this turn, and we have the Kami War to deal with the next thing, so I think we're in a good spot. Opponent untaps and plays a tap land before running out their commander, Niv Mizzet the Guild Pact. Nothing to worry about though, Kami War can bounce it. And it was in this moment I realized this particular Niv Mizzet has protection from multicolor, which is quite literally almost every non-land card in our deck. I panicked for a minute before I noticed the Dune Blast in our hand, which is basically our only decent answer to this. After this, our only real answer is Cyclonic Rift, so let's hope they don't get it on the board again. After we deal with Niv, we run out some cards to start emptying our hand. Feybarrow Elder, Riku, and Bandit's Hall all get introduced to the game, and we end up drawing one of our better commands here. We play a tapped Watery Grave and finish the turn. Opponent untaps, and it's a good thing we found Ojutai's command, because we'd be in trouble if we didn't. They fire off Niv almost immediately, and we cast Ojutai's command to counter and draw. They put Niv back and pass the turn. At the end step, we cast Groll Charm on any mode. Doesn't really matter since it basically just says pay Groll colors and discard this card to do nothing. We draw a card and make a bird token from our triggers. We untap and the Kami War flips here and we go straight into combat. We attack with everything, knocking the opponent down to 11. Post-combat, we start off with Golos to go grab the World Tree. Then we play a tapped Breeding Pool and pass the turn. We're representing way above lethal, so no point in running anything out into a board wipe. Opponent untaps, and after some careful consideration, they decide just to concede the game. Game 2, we're on the draw against Felia, and we keep at 7. Opponent starts the game with the Plains and an Authority of the Consuls before passing. We draw and start our turn with a Jetmir's Garden before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Lunarch Veteran followed by a Plains and passes. We untap and play a Zagoth Triumph again before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a Plains, then they move to combat and attack for 1. They pass the turn holding up their 3 mana. We untap and draw and play a Mana Confluence. We actually do something this turn by playing a Monastery Mentor. It enters tap thanks to Authority and they gain 1 life. We pass the turn and at the end step, opponent flashes in their Corgi. They untap and start off with a Plains, followed by a Metastatic Evangel. They move to combat and attack with both creatures. Corgi triggers, and they blink Authority of the Consuls for some reason. They drop us to 20 and move to the end step, where the Authority returns. We untap and play an untapped Overgrown Tomb. Next, we play Orzhov Charm to destroy the Evangel. This triggers Prowess, which grows our Mentor. This means we can Dromica's command to have our Mentor fight their Corgi and it survives the exchange, and we can make them sack their Authority. After everything resolves and they put a Corgi back in the command zone, we move to combat and attack for 4 before we end the turn. Opponent untaps and starts off with a Nyx Lotus, a decent card that I forgot existed because I don't have one in my collection. Opponent moves to combat and attacks for 1 before passing the turn. We untap and take this turn to play Omnath. Last game he died pretty quickly. Let's see if we can get him to stick around this time. We move to combat and attack with just Mentor before we pass. Opponent untaps and drops a Plains, followed behind by Corgi. Next, they run out a Guardian of Ghirapur to blink their Nyx Lotus before passing the turn. We untap and draw a Tome of the Guild Pact. Omnath triggers and we find an Ornithopter of Paradise. We cast the Tome and play an untapped Steam Vents so we can also cast the Thopter. No attacks and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays an Elspeth Resplendent. They tick it up to give the Corgi a +1/+1 counter and a flying counter. Next, they play a Revered Hoplite to make a bunch of tokens. They move to combat and attack with the Corgi and the Angel. They blink their Hoplite and drop us to 3. At the end step, their Hoplite returns and they make a bunch more tokens before passing the turn. We untap and play the World Tree to get perfect mana. Then we play the Mirror Convert. After recording, I replaced this with Ancient Cornucopia, but that's not relevant right now. This is followed up with an Obscura Charm to blow up the Evangel, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and just plays a Plains, so they didn't draw anything good. They tick down Elspeth to dig for something, and they find an Altar of the Pantheon. They move to combat and attack with the Corgi, which triggers, and they blink their Hoplite. So I kinda goofed here. I have Crackling Doom, and we do cast it, but I should have cast it before the Corgi attacked, so they didn't get to blink the Hoplite. It's okay though, we get rid of the Corgi for now, and we're still alive. Post-combat, they recast Corgi, and their Hoplite comes back at the end step. They have a huge board at this point. We untap and draw for turn. Then Omnath triggers and we reveal a Jeskai Charm. We use that to make Jeskai colors and cast it to get Elspeth off the board. Next, we play a Gilded Lotus to make another token. Then we play a Cascading Cataracts and manually tap some mana to cast Night of Autumn, our replacement for Selesnya Charm. We draw a card with Tome, it enters, and we gain 4 life before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Speaker of the Heavens, which just so happens to be a creature. We fire off our Ojutize command to gain 4 life and counter target creature spell. We draw a card with Tome and opponent passes. We untap and draw for the turn. Omnath triggers and we reveal a Riku. We make Temur colors to cast him and that draws us a Hostile Takeover. We play Arcane Signet and move to combat. We attack with all of our tokens, the Mirror and Night of Autumn. I edited this heavily because they took ages to declare blockers and they did it 1 creature at a time, so we just jumped to the end. After combat, we pay 3 to put Jegantha in our hand. Then we cast Hostile Takeover, and I for sure misplayed this. I was thinking Riku would trigger, so I could put a counter on him, making him a 4/4 and he would survive this. But that only works for modal cards, and Hostile Takeover isn't a modal card. So Riku unfortunately dies without doing anything this game. We still have our Thopter though, so that's something. After that, we run out Jegantha, which triggers our Tome to draw a card. They flash in Corgi, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Cleric class, followed by Disturbing the Veteran. Next, they activate the 2nd level of Cleric class and pass the turn. We untap and draw a card before Omnath triggers. It finds a Whirlwind of Thought, so we reveal it to make Jeskai colors so we can cast it. This triggers our Tome, and we draw a card and make another token. Next, we cycle a Triome to dig for something of value. We play a Polluted Delta and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and attempts to play a Radiant Destiny, but we send it on an Endless Detour instead. This draws us some cards, and we make another token. Opponent puts Destiny on the bottom of the deck before ticking up Cleric class to level 3. They get back their Hoplite from the bin and put a counter on Corgi. At the end step, we tap everything we have for mana to float it for Omnath, and we crack our polluted delta. In the middle of this, I remembered the QQ shortcut, so that's why I stopped halfway through. We cycle a Rafine's Tower before going to our turn. We untap and draw another land, then Omnath triggers, and we hit an Izzet Charm. It doesn't make us mana, but we can use it to Faithless Looting and get rid of some of these lands. We draw 4 cards total, thanks to Tomb and Whirlwind, then we discard Temple Garden and Blood Crypt. I start manually tapping again like a dingus, not realizing I have floating mana, so I can cast Ramos Dragon Engine. Afterwards, we follow this up with Witherbloom Command so we can blow up their Cleric class and get the Spirit off the board. This draws us some more cards, and we make another token, and we still have a bunch more that we can do here. We cast Chromatic Lantern to draw another card with Whirlwind, make another token, and grow our team even more. Opponent scoops at this point, but Flying Crane technique would have been how we finish this up. Just the 2 games today, because that game against the Corgi went on for ages. Before editing, that game was almost 20 minutes, and I cut it down to 9. I recorded over 20 games for this video, but I only wanted to use the ones that were the most fun to watch, and I think I accomplished that. I don't have any footage for losses. Every game I lost was because I either got mana screwed and it was basically just a non-game, so no point in showing that, or I scooped way too early to decks that I don't like playing against, like Nadu and Roxanne. I talked a few weeks ago about how Simic Good Stuff combo just isn't my cup of tea to sit through, so I didn't even bother, and Roxanne is a whole rant for another day that I'll probably make a short about soon because I need to get that frustration off my chest to someone other than my fiance, who doesn't even play Magic and doesn't understand why I'm so annoyed. Anyway, back to the deck, and I genuinely impressed myself with how good this was. Some of the cards in this are bad, and should even be the deck for the sake of the theme. I almost replaced Scroll Charm with Decimate because it is so bad. Literally none of the modes are relevant in any given board state with this deck. At least Izzet Charm is a Faithless Looting when it's bad, and Orzhov Charm is removal and protection, albeit very poorly. I used to play Lucky Charms in Paper, and I've always had the same opinion about Growl Charm. It is so far and away the worst charm that it's not even worth it. The most it's ever done is when I cycled it to draw 2 cards from Whirlwind of Thought and Tome of the Guild Pack. This deck was fun to play, and I'm genuinely going to keep this deck together and play it for a while. All of my companion decks I'm going to keep and continue to play, but this one I might consider rebuilding in Paper. None of the cards are super expensive except for the lands and Cyclonic Rift, and it reminded me of when I was in high school playing this deck at the lunch table with my buddies when I used to have it in Paper. Anyway, that's everything for this week. If you like the deck, you can find a full deck list in the description below. While you're down there, go ahead and tap that like button too. It adds 1 mana to the YouTube algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe so you can become a member of the Blue Crew today. If you want to check out some more of my content, you can check out last week's video where we played something a little odd with Obosh the Prey Piercer, or you can click on this playlist to watch some of my shorts.